Hi, my name is Robert, and I live in Dallas, Texas. It's a big city, full of opportunity, but like many places, it comes with its own set of challenges. I work at a marketing firm, nothing too glamorous, but it pays the bills, and I've been trying to make my way up the ladder. Honestly, I've always been the kind of guy who does things by the book. Show up on time, do my work well, keep my head down, and just let everything play out. That was until the day I met Megan. It started like any other Monday. I was sitting at my desk, sipping on my morning coffee, going over the usual emails when my boss, Mr. Charles, called me into his office. Now, Mr. Charles is a straightforward guy, probably in his early 50s. He's the kind of boss you respect, but at the same time, you don't mess with. He's been running the company for over 20 years, and he doesn't tolerate laziness or mistakes. When I walked into his office, I was expecting the usual talk about some new client or an update on an ongoing project. But instead, he told me something completely unexpected. Robert, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Megan. She's going to be working here for a while, and I'd like you to help her get settled in. I trust you can show her the ropes, Mr. Charles said, his voice calm, but serious. I tried to hide my surprise. I had no idea he even had a daughter, let alone one who was about to join the company. Megan was in her early 20s, and as Mr. Charles introduced her to me, I was struck by how different she was from what I had expected. She had this confidence about her that was almost intimidating. She wasn't just some rich kid with daddy's last name. No, Megan was sharp, and she carried herself with the kind of self-assurance that you usually only see in people who have worked hard for what they've got. Hi, Robert. Nice to meet you, she said, extending her hand with a firm grip. There was no hint of nervousness, no need for reassurance. She seemed to be fully in control of the situation. I couldn't help but feel a little out of my depth. We exchanged a few pleasantries, and I could tell she was sizing me up. I wasn't sure what exactly she wanted from me, but I got the sense that Megan didn't need anyone to hold her hand. She was here to make a mark, and I was just the guy who happened to be asked to show her the ropes. I'll take good care of her, Mr. Charles, I said, trying to sound confident. Mr. Charles nodded approvingly. I know you will. Just make sure she gets up to speed with the projects we're working on. As I left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I've been here for a couple of years, working hard, trying to make my way up. And now here was Megan, just stepping into the company as if she owned it. I had no idea what her plans were, but I had a feeling that this was going to be more complicated than I originally thought. The next few days were interesting, to say the least. Megan didn't need much guidance, if any at all. She quickly got a grasp of the work, and it was clear that she wasn't just here because of her last name. She had a sharp mind and knew exactly how to get things done. But there was something about the way she interacted with me that made me feel like I was more than just her mentor. There was a certain spark in her eyes when she spoke to me, something I couldn't quite place. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued. I wasn't sure what to make of it. On one hand, I respected her drive and ambition. But on the other hand, I was starting to feel a bit uncomfortable. She didn't seem like the type to be easily impressed. And yet, there was an undeniable connection between us, one that I didn't know how to navigate. As the days passed, I found myself wondering just how much trouble I was in. I had no idea what Megan's real intentions were, but I had a feeling that this wasn't going to be as straightforward as I had hoped. And that was just the beginning. It's funny how quickly things can change when you least expect it. One day, everything is calm, routine, and the next thing you know, your life has taken a turn you weren't ready for. That's exactly how it felt after my first week working with Megan. I thought I knew what to expect, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next few days, I learned more about Megan. She was smart, confident, and incredibly competent. She picked up on everything quickly and didn't need much hand-holding. At first, I thought she was just here to get a taste of the business world, a little internship before moving on to something else. But no, Megan was here to work, and she was good at it. She wasn't the kind of person who took up space or acted like she was entitled. She didn't flaunt the fact that she was Mr. Charles' daughter. In fact, she barely mentioned it. But there was a subtle way about her, this unspoken understanding that she didn't need to prove anything. She was already proving it every day with her actions. We were assigned to work together on a marketing strategy for one of our clients, a big project that required plenty of brainstorming and long hours. The first few days were fine, nothing out of the ordinary. I was in my usual role, guiding, explaining things, and making sure everything was going smoothly. But as time went on, something began to shift. Megan would ask questions. Not the usual questions, though. She wasn't asking because she didn't understand something. She was asking because she already had an opinion, a strong one, and every time she voiced one of her ideas, it caught me off guard. She was sharp, and there was a certain confidence in the way she presented herself. It wasn't arrogant, just assured. One afternoon, we were sitting at my desk, going over the latest draft for the client's campaign. Megan leaned in close, her shoulder brushing mine as she pointed at the screen. "Why don't we try something more bold here?" she suggested, her voice calm but insistent. "We need to make an impression, play it safe, and we'll blend in with the rest. We got to stand out." I looked at her for a moment, surprised by her suggestion. It wasn't what I had in mind, but I couldn't deny that there was something compelling about her approach. She was right. Playing it safe wouldn't work. I'd seen it with clients before. Safe doesn't sell, but I had always been the one to stick to the tried and true methods. "I don't know," I said, my hesitation clear my voice. "That might be a bit too risky." Megan raised an eyebrow, as if considering what I'd said. Risky or bold? Her eyes met mine, and for a second, I almost lost my train of thought. There was something about the way she looked at me, like she was challenging me, but not in an aggressive way. It was more like she was daring me to think outside the box. Before I could respond, Mr. Charles walked by and stopped at our desk. "Everything going well, Robert?" he asked, glancing at the screen. I nodded, a little thrown off by Megan's suggestion and the unexpected shift in my focus. "Yeah, just fine." "Well, I trust you both will come up with something great for the client, Mr. Charles said with a smile. "Remember, Megan, your father believes in you. Don't be afraid to take risks." His words hung in the air longer than I expected. Megan's face remained neutral, but I could tell there was something beneath the surface. She wasn't just here to follow instructions or play it safe. She was here to make her own mark. After Mr. Charles left, I turned back to Megan. She was already tapping away at the keyboard, completely focused, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The way she carried herself, the way she pushed me, something about it felt different. The next few days only made it more clear. Megan wasn't just a colleague. She wasn't just Mr. Charles' daughter. She was someone who could challenge me, someone who made me question things I hadn't thought twice about before, and, to be honest, I wasn't sure if I liked it. That evening, we were both at the office late, working through some final details. The office was quiet, almost too quiet. It was just the two of us, and there was an odd tension in the air. It wasn't the kind of tension I was used to. It wasn't confrontational, but it was there, unspoken, hanging in the air between us. As we wrapped up, I packed up my things and stood up to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow, Megan," I said, trying to sound casual, like everything was normal. But she didn't move. Instead, she looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Robert, can I ask you something?" she said, her voice softer than usual. I stopped, turning back to her. "Yeah, sure. What's up?" She hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, her eyes meeting mine. "Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions? Like everything's set up for you, but it's not really yours?" I didn't answer right away. It was a question I hadn't really thought about before, not in those terms. I'd always played it safe, kept my head down, and let things happen as they came. But Megan's words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I guess I have. I said slowly, not sure why I was being so honest. She smiled slightly, a knowing look in her eyes. "You don't have to, you know?" And just like that, it felt like something had shifted again. I wasn't sure what it was, but I couldn't deny it. Megan was different, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. The days after that conversation with Megan were a blur. It wasn't like she'd said anything groundbreaking, but there was something about her presence that lingered in my mind. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, challenging like she was daring me to step out of my comfort zone. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in a while, someone had made me question my routine. The safe little bubble I had built around myself. I didn't like it, but I couldn't shake it either. Work continued as usual, but there was an undeniable shift in the air whenever Megan was around. She wasn't just another colleague anymore. She was the boss's daughter. Yes, but more than that. She had an undeniable magnetism that made everyone take notice. It wasn't just her intelligence or her ability to get things done. It was the way she carried herself, like she was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. I had always thought of myself as someone who was in control, but I was starting to feel like I was losing grip. A few days later, it was nearing the end of another long week, and I was finishing up a few reports when I saw Megan walking toward my desk. She looked different today, like she wasn't just here to work. There was a certain purpose in her step. She stopped in front of my desk, a slight smile on her face. "Robert," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of curiosity, "I've been thinking. You've been helping me a lot with the work. But I think it's time we talk more about how we're approaching the strategy. Would you be up for grabbing dinner tonight? I want to pick your brain a little more." Dinner? It wasn't exactly a big deal, but something about the way she asked made me pause. It wasn't a work-related dinner. It wasn't something formal. It felt personal in a way that caught me off guard. My first instinct was to say no, to keep things strictly professional. But for some reason, I didn't. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. "What were you thinking?" She smiled, her eyes gleaming. "I know a place. I'll text you the details." Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked away, leaving me with a feeling of uncertainty. I had no idea what I was getting into, but part of me was curious, maybe more than I should have been. Dinner with Megan was an unexpected invitation, and I wasn't sure what it meant. Was it just work-related, or was there something more behind it? That evening, I found myself getting ready, pacing around my apartment as I tried to talk myself out of it. It was just dinner, right? Nothing to read into. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't help but wonder what she had in mind. I had no intention of crossing any lines, especially not with a boss's daughter, but I wasn't naive enough to ignore the tension that had been building between us. I arrived at the restaurant on time, a trendy spot downtown that had a modern, minimalist feel. Megan was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked effortlessly chic, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, wearing a simple black dress that made her stand out without being over the top. She looked different outside of work, less guarded, more relaxed, but there was still that same intensity about her, that quiet confidence that made her stand out. "Robert," she greeted me with a smile, standing up as I approached the table. "I'm glad you could make it." I sat down across from her, trying to keep my cool. I wasn't sure if I was nervous or just unsettled. I couldn't quite place it. "So, what's this all about?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "You said you wanted to pick my brain about the strategy." Megan leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving mine. "Part of it, yes," she said, her voice smooth. "But I also wanted to get to know you better, Robert. You're a bit of an enigma, don't you think?" I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. "An enigma?" She smiled. "Yeah, you keep to yourself. Don't open up easily. You're good at your job, but there's something else there. Something you're hiding." Her words were bold, and I could feel my heart rate pick up. I wasn't used to being the one under the microscope. I had always been the one asking the questions, the one keeping things close to the chest. But with Megan, I felt like I was unraveling in ways I couldn't explain. "I'm not hiding anything," I said, trying to sound casual, though I could feel the unease creeping up on me. "I just keep my personal life separate from work. It's easier that way." Megan didn't break eye contact. "Maybe, but you're not really answering my question, are you? What's really going on with you?" I felt a sharp tug at my chest. I didn't want to open up, not to her, not about anything. But there was something about the way she was looking at me, like she saw right through me. That made it hard to lie. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to change the subject. "So what about you?" I asked, hoping to deflect. "How did you end up in this line of work? I mean, I know your dad owns the company, but you don't seem like someone who would just follow in his footsteps." Megan chuckled softly, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You'd be surprised how often people assume that. But no, this is something I want to do. It's not about my last name. It's about what I can do on my own." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. The conversation was getting heavier, and the line between professional and personal was starting to blur. Megan wasn't just interested in business. She was interested in me, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. There is a certain magnetism about her, something that drew me in despite my better judgment. But I couldn't afford to get too close. I knew that. As the night wore on, I felt the tension between us grow. It was like we were both dancing around something we couldn't say, something we both knew was there, but didn't know how to address. And as I left the restaurant that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening between us wasn't just a passing thing. It was something deeper, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep pretending it wasn't. The days that followed our dinner felt heavier, more than the usual stress of work and deadlines. There was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Megan's words from the night before echoed in my mind. "You're an enigma." I'd spent a lot of my life keeping things close. But now, it felt like I was walking a thin line between maintaining control and letting something else take over. And the worst part, I wasn't sure if I was ready to stop it. The next morning, I showed up at the office with my usual routine. Grab coffee, check emails, and power through the day. But there is a subtle difference now. Megan wasn't just another coworker anymore. She wasn't just the boss's daughter. The way she looked at me, the way she spoke to me, it felt different. I couldn't escape the feeling that the dinner had been more than just casual. There was something beneath the surface, something that I hadn't fully acknowledged yet, but that felt impossible to ignore. At around midday, I found myself walking toward the break room, trying to clear my head. I hadn't planned on seeing Megan, but of course, as soon as I stepped inside, there she was. She was talking to a few colleagues, laughing at something one of them said. But as soon as she noticed me, her smile softened. It was almost as if she had been waiting for me to show up. "Robert," she said, her voice warm, but with an edge I couldn't quite decipher. "I've been looking for you." I raised an eyebrow, suddenly feeling more alert than I probably should have. "Looking for me? I didn't think I'd be hard to find." She smirked, leaning against the counter casually. "I just wanted to check in. You didn't seem like yourself after dinner the other night. Everything okay?" I nodded, trying to keep things light. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just a lot on my plate." But even as I said it, I could feel the tension between us. It was more than just the usual work stress. It was the lingering energy from the night we spent together. Something unspoken that hovered in the space between us. "You sure about that?" Megan's eyes never left mine. "Because you seem a little off. You didn't even text me back after dinner." I hadn't realized it until now, but she was right. I had let the night slip by without reaching out. I had told myself it was nothing, that it was just dinner, just business. But deep down, I knew it had been more than that. And now, Megan was pushing for something I wasn't sure I was ready for. "I just didn't think it was necessary," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Megan's expression didn't change. "I'm just saying, maybe we should talk more. You know, about where things are going. Or maybe not. Maybe you're not interested in all that." I felt my heart rate pick up. Was she teasing me? Or was she genuinely trying to figure me out? Either way, I couldn't help but feel like she was playing with me. And the thought made me uneasy. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, my tone a bit sharper than I intended. Megan's smile didn't falter, but there was something darker in her eyes now. "I think you do, but we don't have to talk about it. Not yet, anyway. But just know, I'm not one to leave things hanging, Robert." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling like I'd just been hit by a wave of uncertainty. What had just happened? Was I overthinking this? Or was she really pushing me into something? I wasn't sure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't something I could easily walk away from. That afternoon, I couldn't concentrate on anything. My work, my responsibilities, it all felt secondary to the pull that Megan had over my mom. I told myself I wouldn't let this thing between us go anywhere, that I would keep things professional. But every time I saw her, it felt like the boundaries I'd set were slipping away. At the end of the day, when the office was winding down and everyone was packing up, I found myself standing in the elevator with Megan. She was on her phone, probably responding to emails or whatever business was on her mind, but I could feel her proximity. It wasn't just physical, it was the intensity between us that made the air around us thick. When the elevator doors opened, Megan stepped out before me, turning slightly to glance over her shoulder. "Dinner again tomorrow night?" she asked casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I hesitated. I knew I should say no, that I should put up boundaries before things went too far. But instead, I found myself nodding, just as I had the last time. "Sure," I replied, not entirely sure why I was agreeing, but unable to stop myself. As the doors closed behind me, I couldn't help but wonder what I was getting myself into. The line between professional and personal had already blurred, and tomorrow night would only make it more difficult to keep things in check. I had crossed a line without even realizing it, and now there was no turning back. The next day felt like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, no matter how hard I tried. The office felt like a strange place, as if everyone around me was moving in slow motion, while my mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. I kept replaying the conversation with Megan in my head, the way she had looked at me, with that mix of curiosity and something deeper. Every time I thought about it, I felt both excited and terrified. I knew I had crossed the line, and I had no idea what would happen next. The day dragged on, and by the time the clock hit 5, I was counting down the minutes until I could leave. It wasn't the work I hated. It was the weight of the unspoken things hanging between me and Megan. I couldn't stop thinking about the dinner we had planned. She had said casually, but I knew there was more to it. Was she testing me? Or was she serious? What was she hoping to get from all of this? I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I wasn't going to let her get into my head. But when I walked out of the office and saw her standing by her car, waiting for me, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. She smiled when she saw me, and for a moment I forgot about all the doubts and the boundaries I was supposed to maintain. "Hey," she said, her voice easy, like we were just two people grabbing dinner after a long day of work. But I could sense the undercurrent, the electricity between us, and I knew she felt it too. I replied, trying to act normal. "You ready?" "Yep," she said, stepping forward and walking with me toward my car. "I'm starving." The drive was quiet at first, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and undeniable. Megan wasn't saying much, but every now and then I'd glance at her, and she'd catch my eye with a look that made my heart skip a beat. It was like we were playing a game, but neither of us knew the rules. When we arrived at the restaurant, a quiet, upscale place in the city, Megan led the way. She was confident, at ease, while I felt like I was stumbling over my own thoughts. As we sat down at a small table in the corner, I realized I couldn't keep pretending that this was just another work dinner. This was different. There is something more between us, something that neither of us could deny anymore. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair and studying me with a thoughtful expression. "How's work going? You seem a little distracted today." I hesitated, trying to find the right words. How could I explain what was really going on? That every moment I spent around her made it harder to focus? That every glance from her seemed to pull me in deeper? "It's fine," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Just a lot on my plate, you know?" Megan nodded, but didn't press further. She was always so easy to talk to, and I hated how much I wanted to keep talking to her. But this wasn't supposed to happen. I was her father's employee. I was supposed to keep things professional. But the more I tried to resist, the harder it became. The waiter came by, and we ordered, the tension still lingering between us like a cloud. As soon as he left, Megan turned her gaze back to me, her eyes intense, but with a softness I hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet but deliberate about us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What did she mean by that? My mind raced as I tried to figure out what she was really saying. "Us," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady, though I was anything but. Megan didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a sip of her wine and stared at me for a moment, as if weighing her next words. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and almost teasing. "I think you know what I mean," she said, the corners of her mouth turning up just slightly. "You're not as immune to me as you like to think." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She was right. I wasn't immune to her. But that didn't mean I wanted this to go anywhere. This wasn't just about attraction. It was about crossing a line that shouldn't have been crossed. I opened my mouth to say something, to tell her that we couldn't keep doing this, that we needed to put a stop to whatever this was. But before I could, she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine with a look that made it hard to breathe. "Robert," she said softly, "I can tell you're trying to resist, but I don't think you want it anymore." "Not really." Her words were like a challenge, and I felt my chest tighten. It was as if she knew exactly what I was thinking, what I was feeling. She knew how to push my buttons, how to make me question everything I thought I knew about myself. I opened my mouth again, but this time, no words came out. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to tell her that what we were doing wasn't right, that we couldn't keep going down this road. And yet, as I looked in her eyes, I felt myself slipping into something I wasn't sure I was ready for. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. And when the check came, Megan didn't even let me pay. She insisted on covering it, with a grin that made me feel both appreciative and uneasy. As we walked out of the restaurant and toward the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control. I didn't know where this was headed, but I had a sinking feeling that I wasn't going to be able to stop it. The following days felt like they were dragging on forever. Every time I walked into the office, I could feel Megan's presence lingering in the air. There were moments when I thought things were back to normal. But then I'd catch her eye, and it would all come rushing back. The tension, the unspoken words, the things we had both ignored for too long. After that dinner, I knew I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't a problem. We had crossed a line, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no way to go back. The situation had gotten out of hand, and there was only one thing left to do. Put a stop to it before it went any further. It wasn't easy. Megan hadn't brought it up again, but I could tell she was waiting for me to say something. And every time I saw her at the office, I could feel that pull, that temptation to give in, to let things go further. But I couldn't let myself, not anymore. Finally, on a Friday afternoon, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to talk to her. I knew that if I didn't, things would only get worse. I found her at her desk, looking up at me when I walked in. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that made my heart race. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She nodded, her gaze never leaving mine. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. I needed to make this clear. I needed her to understand. "Megan," I began, my voice serious. "What happened between us, it's not something I can ignore. I know we've both felt it, but this isn't right. I don't want to keep crossing lines, and I don't want to jeopardize everything." She didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me with that same unreadable expression, and for a brief moment I thought maybe she didn't understand what I was saying. But then she spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I know." I blinked, surprised by her response. "You know." She nodded. "I know what I was doing. I know what I was hoping for. But I also know that it wasn't fair to you, to either of us. I'm sorry, Robert." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had thought I would have to be the one to end things to put my foot down. But here she was, admitting it, taking responsibility. "I'm sorry too," I said quietly, my own guilt surfacing. "I should have stopped it before it got this far. I got caught up in everything, but I know now that it wasn't worth it." Megan took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging slightly, as if a weight had been lifted from her. She looked at me one last time, her expression softening. "I never meant to hurt you, Robert. I don't know. I thought maybe there was something more. But I see now that it's not the right time, and we can't keep pretending it's okay." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. It was over. We were both on the same page now, and I knew that this was the best decision for both of us. "I think we're both better off moving on," I said, my voice steady, but with a hint of finality. Megan stood up from her desk and walked over to me. She gave me a small smile, one that was both sad and understanding. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "For being honest, I think we'll both be okay, but we need to let this go." I watched as she turned and walked back to her desk, a weight lifting off my chest. It was over. No more tension, no more uncertainty. We had both made the choice to end it before it caused any more damage. As I left the office that day, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved, knowing that I had made the right choice. But there was also a lingering sadness, a sense of loss. Not because I regretted what had happened, but because it was something that should never have occurred in the first place. In the end, we were two people who had gotten caught up in something they didn't fully understand. We had both learned the hard way that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And the only way forward was to let go of the past and move on. It wasn't easy, but it was the only choice we had left. And as I walked out of that office for the last time, I knew that it was finally over.